Right, today I am ridiculously privileged because I am able to introduce to you John Rossetti, a man of whom I was so jealous when I was in my teens that frankly the English language doesn't really equip me to express that, and I don't think this is either the place or the time really for contemporary dance. But John, what did you do that aroused such jealousy in me?
Well, I took part way back in 1977 in what turned out to be, in fact, the first ever reality TV show, although the phrase wasn't even coined in those days, when the BBC tried to find a group of people that would live completely isolated for more than a year in the technology of the Iron Age in Great Britain. And that's what I took part in with my wife at the time, Kate, and a group of 6 couples in total who were picked from just people who applied to the BBC and who got through their selection process and just thrown really into this primitive living and seeing how we would survive in that environment, and also find out a bit about the way of life and what it would have been like to be an Iron Age man, woman 2,000 years ago in the UK.
Right, so this was quite different from modern reality television, where the standard formula is you get 20 idiots with loud and clashing personalities, and you make sure that they're incompetent, and you give them things they can't do and watch them make idiots of themselves and film them constantly and put together all the stupidest bits. Whereas in this case, you got 15 people who actually got on reasonably well, who were quite competent, and most of the time actually left them to their own devices.
Well, it was incredible the degree to which we were left to our own devices. I mean, the BBC and John Percival, the producer, who was a really, really great guy and an archaeologist as well as a BBC producer, and he really wanted to bring archaeology to life. And he'd taken a long time to persuade the BBC to allow him to take these people and incarcerate them, all the dangers of that, you know, all the problems with the local planning people who said, oh, you've got to have fresh water, you've got to have, you know, fire safety. We had none of that. We were completely isolated. The whole place could have burnt down. Bear in mind, we were in a
so literally you had no fire extinguisher, there was no safety net of that sort.
You could never have done that programme today, unfortunately. You just couldn't do it. And so one of his biggest fears was if you brought a random group of people together, particularly young people, there'd be all sorts of relationship issues and things. They'd all start fighting, it would fall apart. And he'd invested the fact that this thing had to last for a year of people completely isolated, cut off from modern life completely, and just thrown in this technology and see how they survived, see what they did, see what that might have taught us about the Iron Age life. And also looking, of course, at how modern people could or couldn't survive and adapt in that situation.
Right, so you were recreating specifically the Iron Age, but with no attempt to make them Iron Age people. But you did, for instance, you had a loom, and the loom weights were in imitation of actual Iron Age loom weights. They were that triangular shape and so forth, whereas in fact you could have used some other shape that would have worked, but you wanted Iron Age ones. So it was to some degree a reenactment of a specific period.
We weren't really reenacting. What we were reenacting was the technology. Yep. So we were restricted by the technology, but I would call it the wood age, not the iron age, because the iron was really used to cut wood, which was your main material. Yes. Iron was relatively scarce. Right? And a lot of people said to me, oh, you were just playing at that because, you know, you could have used all the things you know in the modern world, but there was nothing I knew in the modern world I could use. I couldn't build a computer out of wood and iron. You know, there was nothing really. There was only one thing I remember that would have been useful, would have been the idea of a windmill, because we spent hours and hours every day grinding corn, and that was the only bit of technology that we could have had that we knew about, but it would have taken us years to build anyway.
Well, that's interesting, because I was on at the Lyra research station years ago in Denmark, and I was doing some hand querning. So you just got a rounded lump of stone in your hand, and I only querned enough to make a dozen biscuits. And even in the time I was doing that, I was thinking, right, if this were my task, I would have invented the rotary quern that afternoon, because you stuff this take far too long. And you were quite lucky in that you had a rotary quern, which was white hot technology in the Iron Age. In the poor old Bronze Age,
it still took, it still took 5 or 6 hours every day for one person just to make enough flour to keep a group of 15 of us fed with unleavened bread.
I'd love to see some sums done for the energy expended in grinding the stuff, and then how much energy you get back. But you reckon you were in profit just?
There was a lot of sweat involved, yeah.
Right.
But going back to the group, so of course the producer wanted people who could get on, and who were fit enough to survive, and they actually chose twice as many people as they wanted. They put us all together in a really hard work. On a reconstructed Iron Age camp at Butser Hill.
Oh yes.
And then we had to vote for the people we wanted to go with. So we were kind of like having to do the job and also ingratiate yourself with the others, so you'd get voted on. So it was a sort of self-selecting group.
Right. So you knew that was the selection method.
We
when
do
you
that. Once
Right.
we've been selected down to twice as many couples as they wanted. And what has happened is that, which is probably the most remarkable thing in some ways, is that of those 6 couples, 4 have kept together.
Right.
And we still have reunions, meeting up with the Iron Age festivals, which are 4 year.
Yes.
So the festivals were the time when we actually decided that we would kill an animal and drink some wine and actually
Make merry.
Yeah, because the in between times were so harsh. And then after a year of being apart at the end of the project, we thought we really feel strange. We lost our community, and we decided we'd get together on the 4 festivals a year. We've done that every year since 1979. So we're still all getting together, and now of course it's the next generation down. And sometimes the whole group is about 35 people, and we get together 4 times a year still after 35 years.
Excellent. You're saying all this to me with a gleam in your eye. It strikes me that this 13 months of being in the Iron Age looms like how big a part of your total life have those 13 months ended up being? Would you say?
Well, I think. Maybe some other people who were there would say more than me. I mean, I thought it was a fascinating thing to do. I was quite terrified beforehand, the idea of being cut off for that amount of time. I really was uncertain about it. It was my wife who was pushing it. I thought, you must be mad.
Okay.
But I see it in the context of, well, just in a way it makes you more confident, because you know that if the worst comes to the worst, you can live on bread and milk. So in a way, other things can therefore be put in their place. But it was also, to me, yes, it makes some other things less important, like day-to-day stuff, than you might think. But I've carried on with a technologically driven life in software.
Right.
But as far as I'm concerned, evolutionary wise, we're exactly the same people as Iron Age men. We're just using our brains as they did to produce the best life for us that we can.
Lindybeige!